The pressure now allegedly comes from inside palace walls themselves. According to reports that have detonated across royal circles, a high-level palace courtier privately admitted that the controversy surrounding Archie and Lilibet has become impossible to contain. Those words, impossible to contain, are what suddenly changed everything, because palace staff do not casually speak to media outlets about succession scandals unless panic has already begun behind the scenes. And now royal watchers are asking the question Buckingham Palace reportedly hoped would never enter the mainstream. Why were Archie and Lilibet's births handled so differently from every other modern royal birth in history? For decades, the system was simple. Royal births were documented publicly. Doctors signed official notices. Procedures were followed carefully because the monarchy understood something critical. Succession legitimacy is not private family business. It is constitutional business. But when Meghan Markle entered the royal family, suddenly everything became secrecy, confusion, unusual timelines, hidden records, and carefully controlled appearances. And now critics are saying that secrecy may have created the biggest royal credibility crisis since the days of Edward VIII. Lady Colin Campbell has now become the central figure driving this controversy deeper into mainstream conversation, and palace aides reportedly hate how impossible she has become to silence. Because unlike internet accounts that disappear overnight, Lady C is connected, experienced, legally fearless, and extremely careful with wording. She keeps repeating one devastating argument over and over again. If there is nothing to hide, why not simply provide the verification procedures every other royal birth followed? That question keeps haunting the palace because nobody has managed to shut it down cleanly. And according to insiders, the problem exploded again after renewed attention was placed on Prince Harry's own memoir Spare. Specifically, one line, one tiny detail that now looks catastrophic in hindsight. Harry proudly claimed Meghan was back home at Frogmore Cottage roughly 2 hours after Archie's birth. 2 hours. And once critics began focusing on that timeline, social media exploded again overnight because people started asking uncomfortable questions. How does a first-time royal mother supposedly give birth, recover, complete medical observation, transport safely, and return home almost immediately while carrying a child in the line of succession? Even commentators trying to defend Meghan struggled to explain why Harry would voluntarily include a detail that only intensified suspicion. But insiders allegedly fear the timeline issue is only one piece of a much larger disaster quietly unfolding behind palace gates. According to reports circulating inside royal media circles, some staff members are becoming increasingly frustrated that Buckingham Palace continues refusing to confront the issue directly. Because every month the silence continues, the speculation grows bigger. And what makes this especially dangerous is that the monarchy survives entirely on public trust. Once people begin questioning legitimacy, secrecy suddenly becomes toxic. And then came the phrase that reportedly sent shockwaves through royal communications teams, cloak and dagger secrecy. That was allegedly how one palace insider described the handling of Archie and Lilibet's births. Not private, not discreet. Cloak and dagger. The wording itself sounded less like routine palace confidentiality and more like someone describing an operation designed to avoid scrutiny entirely. Now, the palace reportedly faces another terrifying complication. The internet refuses to let the story die. Every public appearance Meghan made during pregnancy has now been endlessly analyzed frame by frame. Videos showing the baby bump allegedly shifting shape or moving unusually continue resurfacing across platforms constantly. Critics insist the footage looks unnatural. Supporters insist pregnancy appearances vary widely between women, but the visual debate itself has become impossible for palace PR teams to fully erase. And according to insiders, William's camp is allegedly growing increasingly uncomfortable with the long-term damage this controversy could cause to the monarchy's credibility. Because this is no longer just Meghan gossip. It has evolved into a constitutional discussion about succession transparency itself. That is what reportedly has palace aides deeply nervous behind closed doors. What truly escalated panic, however, was the growing realization that mainstream outlets had finally started discussing the issue openly instead of dismissing it entirely. Once Radar Online entered the conversation quoting palace sources, the entire dynamic changed overnight. Suddenly, this was no longer a fringe internet rumor isolated to gossip channels. It had crossed into mainstream royal media territory. And insiders allegedly fear more outlets could follow if pressure continues building. Because here is the part reportedly terrifying terrifying senior palace figures the most. If documentation eventually appears after years of refusal, critics will ask why it took so long. But if documentation never appears, speculation may continue growing forever. Either outcome creates damage. And according to royal watchers, Buckingham Palace may now be trapped in the worst possible position imaginable. And behind all of this chaos sits one question palace insiders reportedly cannot answer cleanly anymore. Why has the royal family allowed this controversy to spiral for so many years without crushing it immediately? Because Buckingham Palace has destroyed damaging stories before. Fast, ruthlessly, quietly. The monarchy survived abdications, affairs, leaked phone calls, humiliating documentaries, and global scandals because the institution understands how to control narratives when it absolutely needs to. But this situation feels different, strangely different, almost as if nobody inside the palace wants to touch it directly because they know once the door is opened, there may be consequences impossible to contain afterward. And according to growing speculation inside royal media circles, that fear may explain the silence more than anything else. Because if the palace aggressively attacks the rumors publicly, they risk accidentally giving the story even more legitimacy. But if they stay silent, critics interpret the silence itself as suspicious. It becomes a trap either way, a constitutional minefield where every possible move creates damage. And insiders allegedly believe King Charles is becoming increasingly frustrated that the controversy simply refuses to disappear no matter how hard official channels ignore it. What makes the situation even more explosive is the timing. The monarchy is already facing enormous instability. King Charles's health concerns continue generating anxiety behind palace walls. Prince William is gradually becoming the visible future of the institution. Public trust in the monarchy among younger generations is already weakening. And suddenly, this scandal arrives directly at the heart of succession legitimacy itself. That is why insiders reportedly fear this story far more than ordinary celebrity gossip. Because this is not simply about Meghan Markle anymore. It is about whether the monarchy's systems of transparency still function at all. And then there is the Samantha Markle factor, another element palace aides allegedly hoped would remain ignored forever. Samantha continues publicly questioning aspects of Meghan's pregnancies while insisting deeper truths are being hidden from the public. Critics dismiss her because of the obvious family hostility, but supporters of the theory keep pointing out something uncomfortable. Even people who dislike Samantha admit the questions existed long before her interviews, and she simply amplified what was already circulating privately among royal watchers for years. Now add social media to the equation, and suddenly the palace faces a completely modern nightmare it cannot fully control anymore. 20 years ago, controversial royal rumors could be buried through newspaper influence and strategic PR relationships. Today, clips spread globally within hours. Old footage gets reposted endlessly. New theories appear daily. Millions of people dissect body language, timelines, medical details, public appearances, and archived interviews frame by frame. Palace insiders allegedly underestimated how impossible it would become to suppress speculation once online creators started treating the story like an unfolding mystery instead of a celebrity rumor. And according to some royal commentators, the biggest danger for Meghan and Harry may not even be proof anymore. It may simply be public perception. Because once enough people begin believing something is hidden, every silence starts looking strategic, every missing detail starts looking intentional, and every unusual timeline suddenly becomes evidence in the public imagination. That is reportedly why palace staff are allegedly terrified of further mainstream media involvement. Once major outlets begin openly discussing constitutional legitimacy questions, the institution risks entering territory it has not faced in generations. Meanwhile, critics continue hammering one argument relentlessly: if every other royal birth followed clear public verification procedures, why were Archie and Lilibet treated differently? That question alone continues fueling the controversy constantly, because defenders struggle to provide an answer satisfying enough to shut the debate down completely. And according to insiders, some palace figures allegedly worry that the monarchy's famous never explain, never complain strategy may actually be making the crisis worse this time instead of containing it. What reportedly shocked aides the most was watching mainstream audiences suddenly start engaging with constitutional details they normally would never care about. Discussions about succession law, legitimacy requirements, royal birth verification, parliamentary authority, and constitutional precedent are now exploding across social platforms. The monarchy thrives on ceremony and symbolism, but once people start discussing legal legitimacy itself, the institution enters dangerous territory, because monarchy ultimately survives on belief, public belief, institutional belief, constitutional belief, and insiders allegedly fear the palace can feel tiny cracks beginning to form under the pressure of this controversy. And now, royal watchers believe the next move may determine everything. If the palace continues ignoring the story entirely, speculation could grow even larger and more aggressive. But if any form of clarification suddenly appears after years of silence, critics will immediately ask why it took so long. That is why some insiders allegedly believe Buckingham Palace is now trapped inside its own strategy, unable to fully deny, unable to fully address, and unable to stop the conversation from spreading globally every single week. Because the truth is, this story has evolved far beyond ordinary gossip now. It has become a battle over transparency, credibility, succession, secrecy, and trust inside one of the world's oldest institutions. And whether the allegations are true, exaggerated, or completely false almost becomes secondary once public confidence itself starts eroding. That is the real danger reportedly haunting palace corridors tonight. Not just the rumors, but the possibility that millions of people no longer believe the palace when it says nothing at all.